Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Lizzie from southern Spain and Justin from London today. And a warm welcome to you and Justin, to you and I, to this hilariously, wonderfully long, brilliant practice of ours that is called Turning Towards Life. I'm very glad to be here. Already, just in the beginning of my speaking, I can feel the intrepid feeling of, oh my gosh, Justin's chosen another source that I don't really understand. And I'm just going to have to listen and wing it and find my way. And somehow that feels excellent to me, because I think what it does, Justin, is also give everybody else permission to not understand what's going on either. And that it's possible just to be with something and find our way. And that is an equally valid way to get through a conversation, to participate in a conversation, as is knowing what you're on about. So I'm feeling very glad to be here in that state, very glad to be here with you and safe enough to say that, and to not feel like I have to know everything or be aware of everything or be anything other than a participant in the conversation, and to see where it all goes. And thankfully, that is the nature and the setup of Turning Towards Life. So I'm really glad of that. And I want to say hello to everybody who's listening. Justin, we've got our new PCC cohort, professional coaching course cohort for this year, probably listening. And I want to say hello to those ones who are just joining us afresh, but also to those ones who listen outside of the realm of coaching and who are just with us because they are participants in the community and conversation around Turning Towards Life. And I'm really glad that everybody's here and with us in this.
Thanks, Lizzie. It's anyone who's listening, who's not watching the video, will not be able to see the magnificence of you sitting on a collapsing beach chair, leaning against a tree on a Mediterranean beach because there's no internet and you're on your phone. I think that is magnificent, and I love that this. I think, like all the best practices and conversations, they keep going no matter what conditions, including having things to talk about that we don't understand as well. So that's fantastic. Also, welcome to everybody. It's really, really excellent to be with everyone. And you all know this if you're listening, but you can talk with us. You can email us, hello@turningtowards.life, or Lizzie or Justin at hello@turningtowards.life. And you can join our Facebook group, and you can get all of the sources and the recordings by email at the turningtowards.life website. And you can support us there, all kinds of stuff. So, Lizzie, I'm thinking about what you said about this source that we're about to read, which I'll say a little bit about. The thing that's really, I think, making me feel very joyful is that I was thinking about how often it is, just being a person, we have no idea what's going on, really. And we do our best to look like we have it together and to look like we understand. And I don't know if maybe this is the same for you. There are many conversations where I don't know what's going on, really. It's sort of like there's a way in which we're talking where it looks like we're being very sort of like together and rational and making sense, and underneath there's all kinds of stuff happening. And it's a very common experience for me to be disorientated in the midst of things. And maybe that's just what life is, actually. So this source, I'm going to hold up this book. I'm loving this book, and it's quite a challenge. It's called Centering by MC Richards, who was a potter and a teacher, an educator, and we've had one source from this before, and I've got one other saved up at the moment for another time. And I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I understand that much of this book at all, but it definitely seems to be doing things to me in reading it. So that's why I'm reading it, and I'm loving it for that. So because you are on a beach on your phone with no way of reading this, Lizzie, I'm going to be both me and you. I'm going to read this twice so that everyone can hear it twice, as if it was me reading and then you reading, and then we'll talk. It's called The Life in Our Resistances. And it's by the potter and writer MC Richards. I've come to feel that we live in a universe of spirit which materializes and dematerializes grandly. All things seem to me to live, and all acts to contain meaning deeper than matter of fact. And the things we do with deepest love and interest compel us by the spiritual forces which dwell in them. This seems to me to be a dialogue of the visible and the invisible to which our ears are attuned. There is, first of all, something in the nature of clay itself. You can do very many things with it. You can push it, this and pull that, squeeze and roll and attach and pinch and hollow and pile, but you can't do everything with it. You can only go so far, and then the clay resists. We know ourselves by our resistances. You can do very many things with us, push us together and pull us apart and squeeze us and roll us flat and empty us out and fill us up. You can surround us with influences, but there comes a point when you can do no more. The person resists in one way or another, even if it is only by collapsing like the clay. Their own will becomes active. This is a wonderful moment when one feels one's will become active, come as a force into the total assemblage and dynamic intercourse and interpenetration of will impulses. When one stands like a natural substance, plastic, but with one's own character written into the formula, then one feels oneself part of the world, taking one's shape with its help, but a shape only one's own freedom can create. I'm going to read the Lizzie reading now. I'm going to read from the middle. We know ourselves by our resistances. You can do very many things with us. Push us together and pull us apart, and squeeze us and roll us flat, empty us out and fill us up. You can surround us with influences, but there comes a point when you can do no more. The person resists in one way or another, even if it is only by collapsing like the clay. Their own will becomes active. This is a wonderful moment when one feels one's will become active, come as a force into the total assemblage and dynamic intercourse and interpenetration of will impulses. When one stands like a natural substance, plastic, but with one's own character written into the formula, then one feels oneself part of the world, taking one's shape with its help, but a shape only one's own freedom can create. It feels funny, Lizzie, to have read twice and then to be the person who speaks, not having heard your voice read it, which I'm so used to, that interchange of hearing you and then saying something. But I think I'm going to keep to the order that we ordinarily have and begin somewhere.
Yeah.
So I this idea that I think that MC Richards, one thing that she's talking about here is that really the only way that we play our part in the dynamics of living is through our resistances, through our particular shape, like the way that if I bring something to bear on you, Lizzie, whatever it is, some kind of invitation or influence or force, or if I try to put you together or pull you apart or squeeze you or roll you flat or empty you or fill you up or surround you by influences, something might happen, but the thing eventually that happens is what I encounter as your Lizzie-ness. The way that you flex or not, the way that you take what I bring or not, the way that you take things in and push back, the way that your own will becomes active and comes as a force. I'm reading this so that she says, when we're plastic, but with our own character written into the formula, that's when we feel ourselves part of the world. And I know that sometimes I have at various times in my life, and this may be because of the particular personality pattern that I've grown into, this speaks very, very deeply to me, because sometimes I felt like I would only be a good person, I would only be a proper person if I really learnt to go along with what everyone else wanted. And the way to belong in the world is to be so plastic, to be so malleable, like clay, that I could literally be rolled flat or stretched out or made into whatever shape other people wanted to, and that would be the way that I would belong. And I suppose I tried that for quite a long time in my life, and sometimes it felt a bit better in the moment, like I'm avoiding some kind of conflict, or I'm not going to upset anyone. But actually, more often than not, what it did was it took me out of life. I stopped being me and I started just being whatever anybody else wanted me to be, which isn't, in a way, really being me. And the more I've learned to be my own shape, to have my own kind of resistances, like the more I've learned to push back against the world in my own way as well as to take the world in, it feels to me like the more I get to be in the world, like the more there's a Justin-shaped something in the world. And it's the same thing if I think about being in relationship with you, Lizzie, even if I think just about this conversation that we have, the idea that a good conversation would be, I would say things and you would just go, yes, I agree with all of that, and would have no Lizzie-shaped something to bring back into the world. It would so obviously be shallow and empty. So I suppose my place that I'm beginning is with this is to see in what MC Richards is writing that there's a way that we each, just to take up her writing, the way that we each, the particular way that we each resist, the way that we don't just soften and lie down in front of everything that comes, the particular ways that we push back against the world are the ways that we take shape with the world's help. The world comes our way and we respond. And our particular response, our particular way that we resist being just swept up in the flow of life, is the place that our freedom belongs. And she says this lovely thing, that's when one feels oneself part of the world. We become part of the world more by being like the kind of clay that you can only push so far than we do just somehow letting go of all of it. So I felt like she was making a grand, joyful appreciation of the benefits and the gifts of our own uniqueness and our own personalities and our own patterns, all of which get us into trouble too. But how glorious it is that that's how we are.
It's I'm experiencing this, Justin, as a very beautiful naming of a point in the dynamic of being myself. And the way that it's showing up as you're talking is recognizing that, like, I can be pushed quite far, I think. And then at some point I go, no. Or I can be listening to something that's not okay and think, oh, I don't know if I've got a place in this or whatever. And then all of a sudden I have to speak. Or something's happening and I don't agree with it. And I think, oh, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should. And then all of a sudden I can't not. There's a point. And I'm not sure I've heard it named in this particularly lovely way before. And it feels very acknowledging of that point in all of us where we suddenly can't keep quiet anymore, or we suddenly feel extremely passionately about something. And the way that this piece of writing is telling us that that's our freedom. It feels really compelling and really dignifying of those moments, which, as you say, can be like really troublesome. Like when we fully show up as the thought we're having or the argument we want to make or whatever, it can be particularly troublesome for us and people around us. But then I also got thinking, Justin, about the nature of harmony. And harmony isn't Like as a musical harmony, harmony isn't a load of the same notes. It's a load of different notes that are creating something because of their difference. And so I'm really in all of those thoughts also really drawn to the kind of tenderness of teenagedom, which seems to me like a very potent period of experimentation of these with these boundaries of what can I say, what am I allowed to say, what am I not allowed to say, like learning in the kind of newbornness that exists in teenageness, where I know I had those years really testing out what lots of things, and in quite an extreme way, and feeling, well, it's not like I had adults around me who could really handle all of that. And I had the particular teenagedom that I had, which as it happens, didn't allow for much differentiation because there was a lot happening that took away from that experience. Because I've got a kind of maybe a contrasting experience to maybe what's ideal, as in having caregivers around who allow you to test the boundaries and move away and move back again and see what's yours and what's not yours and who you are and who you're not and all that stuff. But I can see that in that potent time, some real extremities of this get to be experimented with. And in a way, I'm opening up to not having that just be for that time. Like I'm feeling like an inspiration to think about a rebirth of my teenage years, to see what happens if I were to be teenageness again. To see what happens if I would, like, being, this piece of writing feels like it's giving me permission to stretch into places that are tricky or like less acceptable or something, and to see what my shape might become with this context, with this invitation in place. And the fact that it's being so dignified in this piece of writing, firstly leads me to feel into my own teenageness in a different way and to recreate it somehow now, and have permission for that, and also to relate to the teenage ones in my life, in my family and circles of friends in a really different way, where I can dignify the stretches and welcome them and be curious about them, rather than see my job as in that dynamic, the teenageness needs something to be in opposition to as well, doesn't it? So to stand there as everything needs something to bounce off, but to also at the same time in me be curious as to what the bouncing is and what the diversion is. Because if it's named as, that's somebody's shape, we can each be the guardians of the becoming of each other's shape in whatever way we can, and allow those moments of resistance, as MC Richards is calling it, to be a becoming rather than an annoyance or you're not getting in line, but to see it as a becoming, as a person's becoming and maturation of shapeness in them, in myself, feels like a very beautiful kind of invitation.
It's such a fantastic example, those teenage years, where in many cultures, I know in the culture that we share, Lizzie, it's true that it's the time at which the resistances might become most visible. The push back against the surrounding culture, the push back against other people's expectations. And I'm really appreciating your way of saying this, that first of all, it's not true only then. We could have this be something we attend to all the way through our lives. And the second thing is, there's really something to welcome in it. And what you said about harmony is very helpful, because everyone singing or playing one note is actually very, very, very dull. And then there are kinds of harmonies which are kind of melodic harmonies, like major chords and things, where we hear them. But I was actually listening to a music podcast this week where they were talking about chords in music where all the notes are just one tone, one note away from one another, so they're all next to one another, and it ought to sound terrible, but actually when all those notes are held together, it also sounds deeply interesting and alluring, and we get drawn in by the differences here. So the idea, and then the other thought I had just on that part of what you were saying, Lizzie, is that maybe it's two sides of a fantasy, that harmony fantasy that sometimes we can have. So one is, I might fantasize that if you just agreed with me on everything, that would be really, really excellent, but it would be monotone and it would be boring and it would be. But it's also, in a bigger scale, it's where terrible things like fascism come from. Because fascism is everyone has to agree with the same thing. Everyone has to agree. That's the definition of it, is everyone is of one mind, one heart on something. So we know on a big scale that leads to terrible places for people. So I'm deeply appreciating your way of saying that when something in us comes up that pushes against, that is a resistance to or pushes against, what it does in the rest of us is it gives us a place to discover ourselves too. And I know this from being in conversation with you, when you get to that point where you say, I can see something that feels true, here's a thing that I'm sensing, and you bring it. And it might be something that I don't immediately disagree with or never agree with or never come to an agreement with, but the contact is so contactful to be in contact with your particular shape and my particular shape. There's enormous aliveness in it. And I'm looking back because I know you can't see the text, and the first part of what MC Richards wrote is so brilliant in relation to this. I'm going to read it again and I can say something about it. She says, I'm come to feel that we live in a universe of spirit which materializes and dematerializes grandly. There seems to me to be a dialogue of the visible and the invisible to which our ears are attuned. So when my daughter, who's 18, so she's in the middle of those years, when she brings me her resistances, Lizzie, not only does it give her and me freedom, like freedom to be her and freedom to be me in our unique ways, particularly the place where there are resistances. And actually, just as a sort of an aside, sometimes a resistance is a conflict, but sometimes as a resistance is like, I'm thinking about when you hug somebody, it would be a terrible hug if there wasn't resistance. If your hands just went through them, that would be no hug at all. Like there's all different kinds of resistance that happen. Like our bodily resistance is just the same. But to pick up this thing that MC Richards says about the dialogue of the visible and the invisible, when I speak to her and her uniqueness pushes against mine, or when I speak to you and your uniqueness and my uniqueness push against one another, we're in a dialogue of the visible and the invisible. What comes forward is this marvelous mystery. Like I hear from you for the first time something that you're thinking or feeling that I get to be in the world in a new way because of the way that something that was previously invisible pushes back in our interaction. And it doesn't have to be a conflict. It's simply the way that differences push against one another. Just like when you're making something out of clay, the fact that the clay is not just completely malleable to your hands means it's possible to make something. Otherwise, it would just splurge everywhere. So I was picking up on what you were saying about being a teenage person, being in a relationship with teenagers, which is one of the ways that we could think about it, but it's true of everyone, is that in all of those places, the marvelous complexity and mystery and depths of the world come forward. That's what happens when we take up our freedom this way and we allow ourselves to be different from one another as well as made of the same thing.
I'm really enjoying, Justin, this feeling of, the word conflict has got so many kind of negative, like it shouldn't be happening, negative connotations. And I know in my body, I'm a lover of peace and joy. And that's great. And I have over the years had to become someone who's accustomed to things not being peaceful and joyful all the time. Lots of the time it is, and lots of the time it isn't in my life. And I'm loving this kind of, when you said that it's about freedom, that I get to be me and you get to be you, and we get to be ourselves together. It might not be peaceful and joyful, but it also is joyful because there's freedom, So if I don't have to kind of tiptoe around and be that person, which I know so well, that just makes everything okay by just not being too much and not being visible and not having opinions on things and just going with the flow. And I can see the attraction for me for that, this particular nervous system that I have. But I can also see how it keeps everything just the same as it ever was. And so anytime anything wanted to get born, it kind of couldn't get born because I'm in that pattern of tiptoeing and hedging and seeing how to be amenable. And so I'm finding in this conversation a real gratitude for when we aren't on the same page and there is dissonance between us, and what kind of something can get born there. And I think it's really important to dignify that, because I think a lot of our lives are having an argument with our partner, or being in a kerfuffle with our children, or our work colleagues or friends, or the world itself at large in some way. And feeling that as an invitation to aliveness and freedom to be oneself is a very different thing for those of us who spend a lot of the time pleasing and trying to be amenable and not rock the boat, as it were. And I'm feeling really curious about that now, and really invited and welcomed in all of the adjustment that's kind of had to be made inside of my system to be comfortable with people not getting on with one another, and allowing that to be their dance. And it's not my dance, that's just their dance. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful for this to be about freedom and about being the shape that we are, rather than in an interpretation that if there's any conflict going on, there must be something wrong, and we must be doing this wrong, and there must be a big problem, and there must be and maybe sometimes there is, and it's not that that's not true. But there are many times when we are just becoming, and in the becoming and in the creativity of becoming, there is dissonance, and then things get made out of that. And that's very, very important to dignify that, instead of interpreting that there's something wrong all of the time.
Love that the metaphor here is clay. And you'll know, Lizzie, because we do this often when we're teaching coaching, we often talk about how important it is to learn to be like soft clay, so that we can be impressionable to one another. When I'm with you, I can be soft enough that your presence makes an impact on me. But the thing about soft clay is it's not water. It's got resistance. And I'm thinking, whilst you're talking, that one of the ways through what you're saying is, I know certainly I'm naming a dynamic that there has been in me, that various times in my life I've sort of flipped between either I'm just meant to go along with everyone and have no resistances of my own, or I'm meant to be rigid and fixed and get my way. Like clay that's been baked in the kiln already and that's gone hard.
Mm.
And it seems to me here that either of those ends of the polarity are unhelpful, generally unhelpful ends to be. That there might be times when there's some reason to be at one end or the other. But this sense that we might be, the way that we might engage with our difference is to bring our resistances, right, our will, but also to bring our softness into it too, so that I can be, as I often am, Lizzie, when you and I have a different way of seeing something from one another, to allow ourselves to be changed by the interaction. So my work is to not just let go of the place, the one that I am, but at the same time is to let myself be soft enough that your will, your way, can reach me and can have an impact on me. And so I'll just read this one line from near the end because I think and I stumbled over it both times I read it, but I think it's about this. She says, "This is a wonderful moment when one feels one's will become active, and it comes as a force into the total assemblage and dynamic intercourse and interpenetration of will impulses.
Mm.
My will is not here to dominate you or to make you the same as me or simply in some naive way to have my way. I bring my will and you bring yours. You bring your softness and I bring mine. You bring your resistances and I bring mine. And other people do. And then we're called into this dynamic interpenetration of will, into which so much happens. She says we're plastic, but we've got our own character written into it. That's how we get to be part of the world is by being ourselves and also taking our shape, because I get to take my shape more and more because I'm with you and we're different. That's how I become the shape that I am. I think that's a lifetime's learning to really joyfully do, so that we can be in the conflict and the joys, the harmony and the disharmony, the disagreements that take a long time to resolve and the ones that never resolve and the ones that quickly resolve. That's how we take the shape that only our own freedom can create.
I'm just thinking, Justin, of a world where I say to you, Justin, should we have a go at some dynamic interpenetration of will? And then and consider how we're becoming when we do that. It's like it's a very different story than having a fight. It's like it's great. It's like we often talk about how we are interpreting what's going on, and that's our power as human beings, is that we are interpretive beings, and so we get to tell the story, we get to narrate what's going on. But to narrate you and I feeling very differently about something and seeing things very differently, to narrate that as an interpenetration of will and shaping of our becoming as we're doing it, that doesn't feel frightening to me anymore. That feels interesting. That feels like, oh, something's going to be born. How interesting. Rather than, oh my God, I've got to say this thing to Justin and it's going to go terribly wrong and he's going to feel really upset and what am I going to do? It's like, oh no, this could be something. If we could set the context out in this way that MC Richards is suggesting, this is like a whole different scenario we're going to create.
It becomes for the sake of something different than my getting you to agree with me or be the same as me, or my giving up myself in order to keep you happy, or all of those dynamics. It becomes, I love this, we'll have to say this to one another. Shall we enter into a dynamic intercourse and interpenetration of will impulses, which basically means, should we bring our sameness and our differences in pursuit of our disagreements and our shared ways of seeing things, our arguments as well as our harmony, all for the sake of us and the world becoming what it's going to become? Shall we bring it that way? And then an argument is an argument for the sake of something other than I win, you lose. I feel good, you feel bad, we both feel fine. It's for the sake of something much bigger than that.
Yes.
And that's why I think she says the things we do with the deepest love and interest compel us by the spiritual forces which dwell within them.
Yeah.
What a marvellous conversation, Lizzie. It's
brilliant.
It's an excellent how something that seems so mysterious can unfold itself into something very, very rich. So thank you so much for being here, for speaking to me on your 4G and from a windy beach in the sunshine and keeping up with this practice. And thank you to everyone who's with us. We are so glad that you're here and that you're with us. Please tell people if you think other people would benefit from this conversation. Leave us a review on iTunes. Apple Podcasts if you're around there. Share it around. Sign up to the email, whatever you would like, or just come back to us when you will. We'll be back, all being well, next week, and we really look forward to being together then.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.